To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, visit gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. You and I are probably pretty different. For instance, I love playing guitar, but you might not care about that at all. And while you might love collecting mugs with cute kittens on them, I'd rather make some noise than drink some tea. Across the world, people live in different cultures with different beliefs and interests. But once you remove those social trappings, in general, people actually kind of need the same things, like food, stability, community, just to name a few. Over time, people have naturally banded together to form communities like villages and cities. And when civilizations figured out how to farm, most people chose to do it so they could have a reliable source of food. Having laws and working together to feed ourselves made life a lot safer and more stable. And if enough people group together, you might even get an empire. And those empires often have similar goals, just on a much larger scale. So it may not be surprising that when you zoom in on the history of any given region or culture, you start to see a lot of the same beats. Because we humans are similar and tend to make a lot of the same decisions, like how everything is better with cheese. And when we turn our attention to the empires like those in the Americas and Africa, we find that they also follow those same beats. Hi, I'm Rob Fuller and this is Study Hall, Modern World History. When Afro-Eurasia and the Americas finally made meaningful contact in the 15th century, the Americas had been bustling with their own empires for thousands of years. They weren't like small little civilizations on the cusp of greatness. They were full-blown empires. They were large political organizations that controlled multiple geopolitical territories like city-states or countries under the authority of a single ruler. They had complex social structures. They waged large-scale war. They participated in long-distance trade. Empire stuff. But over the next few centuries, European empires will flood into the Americas and conquer the civilizations of indigenous people. And those conquests were historically excused based on the idea that the people who lived there were less advanced. But that simply isn't the case. As we'll see, societies in the Americas and Africa were complex and nuanced, with their own long histories that stretch back hundreds of years. One of the most powerful empires of Mesoamerica were the Aztecs, located on the west bank of Lake Texcoco in what's now central Mexico. The Aztecs built their empire on a strong agricultural base and eventually controlled much of what's now called Mexico after their predecessors, the Toltecs, went into decline during the 12th century. They used raised fields known as chinampas, which let them increase how much food they could grow. Those fields were built in the center of a lake by piling up dirt, which made them look like they were floating. But more importantly, it provided crops like maize and beans with a constant source of moisture, which allowed the Aztecs to grow more productive crops in a smaller space. But agriculture wasn't the only thing that led to the rise of the Aztecs. Surprisingly, the Aztecs didn't have a permanent military like most empires. Instead, each town in the empire was required to provide 400 men that the empire could call up for their military campaigns. This system allowed the empire to raise as many as 200,000 men that the empire could then use to take over neighboring land and city-states. As the Aztec empire grew, so did their government. Leaders appointed local elites as administrators, they intermarried, and they created a system of tribute that spread Aztec control throughout Mesoamerica. And while the Aztec empire flourished from the mid-14th to 16th centuries, unrest eventually grew among the people of the empire. See, the Aztecs practiced ritual human sacrifice as part of their religion, and they required the tribes they conquered to provide tributes. That made it difficult to integrate some tribes into the empire since, well, they weren't all used to the practice. Spanish conquistadors, though, saw their chance, and they formed an alliance with these rebel tribes to overthrow the empire in 1521 CE. And just like that, the Spanish Empire swooped in and stole the Aztecs' resources to expand and strengthen their own imperial rule. The Spanish arrival in Mexico also brought diseases like smallpox, which the indigenous people hadn't acquired immunity to, eventually wiping out almost half of the population in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. But importantly, the Aztecs were incredibly agriculturally and politically advanced. Their farming techniques provided a surplus of food, and their unique approach to military and social structure allowed them to expand their reach throughout the region. And the Aztecs weren't the only empire in the Americas when Europeans arrived. In South America along the coast of Peru, early empires developed a system that allowed families to join into small communities known as ailu. And this was really important in the Andean region because land elevation increases as you move away from the coast, which means that ecological conditions change drastically from the coastline to the brutally cold mountain ranges. Thus, the way of life could also differ greatly from one place to another, which required a heavier emphasis on local governance. Ailus were previously used by the Norte Chico civilization between 3000 BCE and 1800 BCE, and each Ailu was responsible for fishing or farming or maintaining livestock in their ecological zone, then sharing their goods and resources with other Ailu. It was like a mini trading system based around local economies that worked out for the good of everyone. And instead of reinventing the wheel, or the Ailu in this case, when the Incas rose to power in the 15th century, they adopted the system and built on it. As the Incas conquered new territory, they used the Ailu that were already in place to establish their government. And in the Ailu system, members already worked to serve the chief. So once the Incas took over, all the Ailus pledged allegiance to their Incan ruler instead. The Inca may have been different from the Aztecs, but they also had an incredibly robust culture, adapted for the place they found themselves. And when we look at the similarities between the South American and Central American empires, we see how the formula for empire building translates across regions, continents, and even millennia. So the key to strong empire building comes from that ability to lean into the strengths of your civilization, which we can see through the social structures of the Inca or the agricultural prowess of the Aztecs. And if we head back over the Atlantic Ocean, in some parts of Africa, it made sense to place the gold trade at the center of empire building. In the Middle Ages, West Africa was one of the biggest producers of gold in the entire world. Like the Silk Roads in Central Asia and the Gulf Coast in Central America, the Niger River provided a wealth of resources for empire building, like fertile soil, fishing, and the ability to control the gold trade. And from 1240 to 1645 CE, the Mali Empire used those resources to grow into the largest empire Africa had seen to that point. The Mali Empire used their centralized government and well-trained military to expand and conquer throughout West Africa. But the Mali Empire didn't start from scratch. They took over major trade routes that had already been established in their region by their predecessors, the Ghana Empire. And they capitalized on the lucrative trade of gold, salt, slaves, and ivory that was already happening. Like the Incas, the Mali figured that if a system wasn't broken, there was no need to fix it. And not to mention, citizens tend to like familiarity. And all that trade attracted Muslim merchants to the region. Along with adding to Mali's powerful trade networks, these merchants also converted Mali rulers like Mansa Musa to Islam, beginning the spread of a new religion in West Africa. But the Mali Empire was eventually weakened by civil wars and the opening of competing routes in other areas, both of which detracted from their profits and left them vulnerable to conquest. And in the late 15th century, the Songhai, a nearby empire, was ready to use their military force to take over the gold trade and end the Mali Empire in the process. The Songhai didn't just rely on military might and the gold trade to strengthen their rule, though. Because they were ruled by Muslims, the Songhai got involved in Islamic politics across the Sahara, which allowed them to build their empire's reputation through diplomacy too. But even Songhai would fall to a Moroccan military expedition at the Battle of Tondibi in 1591. There, the Moroccan army defeated and overthrew the Songhai. Just like the empires in South and Central America, Mali and Songhai used the promise of resources and profit to keep their empires flowing and growing. They played to their strengths of gold and religious diplomacy to grow their influence. And then they fell. Like many of the empires before them, all these empires met their end through some mix of conquest, political infighting, civil war, disease, the regular reasons empires fall. Because at the end of the day, they were empires, which is incredibly important to say. They checked all the boxes. They had sophisticated political structures, engaged in large-scale trade, they waged war, all that classic empire stuff. But in the coming centuries, the former people of these civilizations will be subject to atrocities at the hands of European colonial forces. And those colonial forces will often excuse their actions by claiming these societies and their people were barbarous or less technologically advanced. But that just wasn't true. They were just people in empires that were built to make use of the tools provided by their environment to develop their own politically advanced systems and drive innovation that reflected the needs of the people. And not to mention, some were successor empires too. The Aztecs followed the Toltecs, and Mali and Songhai followed Ghana. These were regions with long-standing complex histories. But they were treated like they were somehow less than, like they weren't real civilizations. Still, those sentiments permeated the diplomacy and culture of colonial powers, and they often still do to this day. These empires weren't new. They weren't ancient or mystical or uncivilized. At the end of the day, they were just empires, filled with people like you and me. If you're enjoying Study Hall Modern World History and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, visit gostudyhall.com or click on the button to learn more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.